It's no secret that most people think the story of Tekken 7 was not very good, and I agree with that. I don't think it was very good at all. A fighting game obviously doesn't have to have great writing, but I think if it's going to have a story, it should at least be a story that makes some sort of sense. The problem with the T7 story was that it was filled with contradictions, and it was also filled with characters who didn't have any motivation. They had no reason to be doing what they were doing in the story, and it turned it into this really confusing mess that didn't really go anywhere. And that's a shame, because there are plenty of people out there who enjoy these characters and this franchise for the story. And I made a video about it a while back. I think I called it something like Tekken 7 has the dumbest story ever written, but I sort of went through the entire story and explained why I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense. Just as an example, we learn in the story that Heihachi threw Kazuya off a cliff because he wanted to test to see if he was a devil or not. But if you just think about that a little bit, you realize that, okay, if Kazuya is human, then the fall is going to kill him and Heihachi will have murdered him for no reason. But if he's a devil and that allows him to survive, then there's no point in throwing him off the cliff. So when the big dramatic sort of inciting incident of the entire franchise is dumb like that, I think it's a pretty big problem. But I mentioned at the end of that video that I'd actually sat down and I tried to rewrite the story of T7 in a way that made a bit more sense. And I had a lot of comments, asking about that, And it was a long time ago. I've switched computers. I don't have the script I wrote anymore. I actually had this plan where I was going to do it kind of like a cinematic with music and sort of narrate it, but I'm just not that good at editing. And like I said, I don't have the material anymore, but I wanted to make something chill now around the holidays, so I thought I might as well sit down and just give you an outline of the ideas that I had to fix the story. I just want to say that I'm not trying to say that I should have written this story or that I'm good at writing this or anything. I think basically anybody out there could have written a better story than what we got in Tekken 7, and I think that includes the people at Bandai Namco. I think it's very obvious when you look at this game that they actually had something a lot bigger, more ambitious, and fleshed out planned for this game, and they were just forced to scrap so much of it. And you see sort of evidence of that all over. For example, in the intro cinematic, there's this beautiful scene where Master Raven is jumping around, cutting robots, and that never ended up in the actual game. So she was obviously supposed to be part of the story at some point. You have these underdeveloped gameplay sections where you're shooting a gun and stuff like that. I think they definitely wanted to do something more with that. But I think really the biggest indication that large parts of this story just had to be scrapped is the journalist narrator character. I don't think he was actually supposed to be part of this from the beginning, but if you think about it like this, the game has to be released. You're not done with the story, but you have these cinematics and these story beats completed. You can use this journalist character and just still images to narrate and do exposition, explain what is going on, and then tie the whole thing together, even though it's not really finished. I think that's what actually happened. It is a guess, but I'm pretty confident something like that went on. Maybe it was because they decided they wanted to shoehorn Akuma into the story, and that meant that they had to change a lot of stuff. I don't know. Only Namco knows. But when I sat down to try and sort of rewrite the story, I had a couple of goals that I set for myself. And the first one was that I wanted to give every character in the story sort of clear motivation. I wanted them all to have a reason to be there. Another big one was that I wanted Kazumi to really matter. And I wanted her to be sort of a bit of a mystery. And I wanted there to be a revelation surrounding her that tied into the story of Kazuya and the story of Heihachi, because I feel like that's how she was set up. She was sort of the key and the explanation to the whole thing, but then in the story of T7, she kind of has three different conflicting motivations, and we never really understand exactly who she was or what she wanted. I also wanted to give Jin something to do in the story, because I think he gets knocked out and then stays in a hospital bed for pretty much the entire game. And then I also wanted to sort of conclude the story in some, reasonably satisfactory way, and maybe try and set something up for future games. So basically what I did was I sat down with the Tekken 7 story written out, and I just jumped in where it got strange, and I tried to come up with, something to fix those areas. So my story starts in pretty much the same way. Heihachi is breaking into the Zaibatsu because he wants to take it back, and he's fighting his way to the rooftop. And there he meets with Nina. And that's the first thing I thought was weird, because Nina just decides instantly to join Heihachi. We never really understand why, and then she's kind of fighting for and with him for the rest of the game. So I think at that point, Heihachi should probably offer Nina something that she wants. And, she's a mercenary, an assassin. It can be something as simple as money or information. But an idea I had is that Nina actually seems to, since at least Tekken 6, actually care a bit about Jin. So maybe Heihachi says that his plan now is actually to find and capture Jin, and Jin is important to his plan, so he promises to not kill Jin if Nina agrees to help him. And that's why she joins the Zaibatsu side of the conflict and Heihachi at that point. Then what happens in the T7 story is Nina and Heihachi get on an airplane and they fly to Italy to find Claudio. And this was one of the weirdest things for me with that story. It didn't make sense at all to me, because the reason in T7 that they want Claudio is basically they want to use his Instagram, but it's laid out that Claudio and his organization has some sort of underground information network, and Heihachi wants to use it to leak and spread bad information about Kazuya to sort of turn public opinion against Kazuya and G Corp in this global conflict. But we also know that Heihachi is already in control of one of the largest business empires in the world. He can appear on your TV magically whenever he wants to, for example, to announce an Iron Fist tournament. So I don't think he needs, somebody else to help him with spreading information, through an information network. He probably, has that ability already. So I wanted there to be a reason for Claudio to be included in the story. And there's actually sort of one provided in the game already, because they say that Claudio is part of this order of warrior monks who have magical powers and have been fighting against evil creatures like demons, like vampires, like Elisa since ancient times. So I think Heihachi is realizing that this is sort of leading up to a final confrontation between him and Kazuya. And Heihachi probably is the stronger fighter out of the two, but he doesn't have the devil gene. Kazuya has the devil gene, and so Heihachi needs some sort of, method for suppressing that part of Kazuya so that he has a chance to actually finally defeat him. And so if you have a magical warrior with powers that specialize in defeating demons, that could be extremely useful. So they find Claudio, and in my version of the story, I think Claudio should entirely be a good character who wants to do the right thing. If you watch his story chapter in T7, he's kind of trying to trick Xiao Yu, and it's sort of set up that he's ambiguously evil, which is kind of a contradiction. It doesn't, make sense when you look at his story in the main game, the main story at all. But I just want Claudio to be a good character who decides to do this because, first of all, he specializes in fighting demons, that's his thing, and only Kazuya and the G Corp side is being led by a demon. But also because he sees this as an opportunity to end this giant, violent global war. So he has, that sort of motivation to join Heihachi's side in the conflict. But the problem with Claudio is, and I think they say this in the story even, that these warriors of Sirius used to be very powerful and have all kinds of magic, but they don't really anymore, and they're kind of not that powerful, and Claudio isn't really confident in his ability to do much against Kazuya. But Heihachi sort of says, well, come with me, we'll figure it out. And one of the keys to figuring that out is we obviously need somebody who carries the devil gene, and that's why they decide to next go after and try and find Jin. We also need to find out what Kazuya is doing here, so I sort of have him being haunted by flashbacks and memories of what happened to his mother all those years ago. I want it to be this traumatic thing that he doesn't really understand or remember, but he's kind of trying to figure it out. But he knows that, his mother died and that his father did it, and it's kind of the main thing that set him on this, dark path of vengeance and hating his dad. And I think as he's sort of being haunted by these flashbacks and this violent conflict is going on all around him, we can sort of tell that he is succumbing more and more to the devil part of himself and kind of growing a bit more corrupted. And maybe that even manifests physically with him, growing horns or an eye in the middle of his forehead. We can sort of tell that he's about to go off the edge, and that kind of introduces a bit more of a ticking clock element and a sense that the story has to lead towards some sort of conclusion soon. But then the next part of the story is Lars going into the desert to save and retrieve Jin. And that's the continuation of the story of Tekken 6, right? Because they had their final confrontation in front of the pyramid. We thought that Jin died, but he survived. He's going around on the sand dunes. Lars realizes this and goes and gets him. That makes perfect sense. And then he takes Jin back to Violet Systems, and we meet the rest of the good crew. So Lee and Elisa, and now Lars and Jin, right? But Heihachi and his gang, Nina and Claudio, next part of their plan is they have to kidnap Jin. So like in the story, they attack Violet Systems because they realize that Jin is there. And like in the main story, they actually fail to do that. But I have, at the conclusion of that, Claudio actually ending up on the side of the good guys. Maybe, for example, the entire thing is about to explode. Claudio is knocked out, but because Lars and Elisa and Lee are good people, they're not going to leave him there to die, so they decide to help him and save him. Anyway, Claudio ends up on the side of the conflict that has Jin, right? And then that basically means that Heihachi's entire plan has fallen apart. He doesn't have Jin, he doesn't have Claudio. Maybe at this point even Nina says goodbye and kind of abandons him. And sort of he's left with not a lot of choices. And at that point, Kazuya challenges him to a final fight or conflict to end the whole thing, stop this global war that is happening and just, have it come down to the two of them basically having a fight to the death, and whoever wins, takes over the other side of the conflict, has access to both, G-Corp and the Zaibatsu, and basically then becomes the most powerful person in the world. So Heihachi doesn't really have a choice. He doesn't have, his Claudio magic or anything like that, but he's forced to go to this conflict where he threw Kazuya off the cliff for the first time, of course, and then they meet up at the volcano, and that's where I wanted to do this thing where you explain what actually happened with Kazumi. I want, them to talk about it, and for Heihachi to explain, or for Kazuya to finally remember what actually went on. So with Kazumi, we sort of know that she came from like a clan of assassins or shadowy people known as the Hachijo, I think, and she was sort of sent to monitor or maybe assassinate Heihachi because they believed he was potentially very powerful and evil, right? Which sort of ended up being a self-fulfilling prophecy. But then Kazumi kind of abandoned her mission, fell in love with Heihachi, and they had a kid, right? But we never understand what Kazumi actually wanted, if she was actually good or evil all along. It's very confusing in the story. So I have it like this. She's sent to assassinate Heihachi, but he's not an evil bastard just yet. So she does fall in love with him, she abandons her mission, and they have a kid together. But when the Hachijo clan realize that Kazumi has failed or abandoned her mission, they have some sort of contingency plan where their agents are infested or injected somehow with this devil gene thing. Maybe even, Kazumi doesn't even know that that's inside of her, but they then have the ability to force a transformation into a violent monster, And so that starts happening to Kazumi, and she loses herself and goes berserk, and she goes after Kazuya because Kazuya is around at that point, and she knocks Kazuya out, but before he's killed, Heihachi shows up and he has to stop his wife, and he is left with no other choice than to kill her, right? So a couple of days later, Kazuya wakes up. He doesn't really remember what happened, but he realizes that his mother is dead and it was his father who killed her. And that sort of, he starts to have this resentment for his dad. All that negative emotional turmoil starts to awaken the devil gene inside of him. And Heihachi notices that. So he knows that what happened to his wife is starting to happen to his son as well. So he goes to the cliff and he throws Kazuya off, completely intending at that point to actually kill him, because he doesn't want his son to turn into a violent monster. So he actually, I mean, it's morally strange choice, but that's, the conclusion that he comes to. He decides he has to kill his son for his own sake, which is why he does it. Doesn't realize that Kazuya manages to survive because of the devil gene, and that's how Kazuya comes back for vengeance later, and the story of, Tekken 1 and Tekken 2 started happening that way. So at that point, Kazuya remembers what actually happened with his mother, but it doesn't change the fact that they're both in this conflict. They're evil, power-hungry bastards at this point, and whoever wins this fight is going to basically, control the entire world. So they fight, for that, leaving the emotional family stuff sort of behind them at that point. And then the fight goes kind of the same way as in the main story. Heihachi seems to be the more powerful fighter, but Kazuya has the devil gene, so kind of like the Incredible Hulk, he kind of grows more and more powerful as he's losing, but he's also changing physically, to the point where he has eyeballs growing out his asshole, everything like that, and eventually he overpowers Heihachi, throws him into the volcano, so Heihachi is dead. And at that point, that's when I want all the other main characters of the story to actually show up and do something. So at this point, we have Lars, Elisa, Lee, Jin, and Claudio show back up. They're seeing Kazuya transform into this horrible, violent monster. They know they need to stop him, and so I think Claudio at this point has realized through connecting with these good characters, talking to Jin, maybe training with Jin or something, that he needs to attempt some sort of ritual, some sort of attack to fight Kazuya. I think in my actual script I had him carry some sort of ancient artifact of his order, like an arrow or something that was made from a shard from a meteor or something, because they worship stars, right? They're the order of Sirius, which is a star. So I had some sort of, artifact that one of his ancestors had used to defeat an ancient demon a long time ago. But Kazuya is way too powerful at this point, so Jin has to transform into Devil Jin to sort of attempt to stall or temporarily suppress Kazuya, so that the rest of them can set some sort of, ultimate attack up, and maybe Claudio shoots this arrow into Kazuya. And then you can do whatever you want with the character of Kazuya, really. You could either have him die at that point, and now both of the main Mishima bad guys are gone, and you have to do something completely new with the story of the next game, or you can have the devil side of Kazuya actually dying or being suppressed at that point, and he reverts back to just being, the human him, and he has to try and figure out, how much of all the evil he has been doing was actually him, and how much of it was that, the devil inside of him going berserk. Or you could kind of do a cheesy Soul Calibur thing where him and Devil actually split at that point and become separate entities, kind of like Siegfried and Nightmare. But that would sort of be the conclusion of the story. But I think it's kind of clear who would be like the villain, or what would happen in the story, because the big thing that isn't tied up here is that we have this Hachijo clan of like super powerful assassins who have the devil gene, who probably understand it and manipulate it, and they're in the shadows, and we haven't heard from them, for many years for any of the Tekken games, but they are obviously an extremely powerful and evil entity, right? And it's kind of their fault that all of this happened, because they're the ones who made Kazumi turn into Devil Kazumi. So I would sort of have it set up that they are this shadowy, powerful organization, and they have the Devil Gene, maybe they have other carriers of the gene who could be characters in the next game who can, show up as actual playable characters or villains. And then you sort of have the remaining characters ambiguous whether Kazuya is still there, but the rest of them, Jin, Lars, Lee, maybe Claudio, decide to team up and take on them for the continuation of the story. So that's just some of the ideas that I had. Like I said, I had this entire script written out with all kinds of things and actual dialogue. It was really cheesy and fun. It was just like a hobby project for me to do, but I've had a lot of comments since then asking, about that. So I just decided to lay it out a little bit. Obviously nothing to be taken too seriously, but I kind of want to know what you think, whether you like the story of T7, what ideas you have, and what you hope for the next game. But like I said, also wanted to make something a little bit chill now around the holidays. I hope you're all doing well and that you're having a good holiday season. Thank you so much for watching this. I'll get back to you around New Year's with some more content, but for now, thank you so much for listening to this, and I'll see you guys again very soon.